The morning the engagement was supposed to be the easiest part of my life, everything began to unravel. My daughter was radiant with plans and nervous excitement. Her fiancé, Ahmed, was polite and steady, and my wife, Samina, seemed distant, smiling at the surface but carrying a secret. I told myself it was nerves, that family dynamics had always been complicated, and that the next 3 days would pass and the wedding would bind us all together. 3 days before the wedding, Ahmed stopped returning my calls. He missed a meeting with the caterer and didn't show up to my daughter's dress fitting. When he finally answered, his voice was shaky and vague. He said things that didn't add up and promised to explain when he could. I felt an unfamiliar chill. Intuition is a dangerous thing when it keeps whispering that something is wrong. It was my daughter who found the first, undeniable sign. While checking Ahmed's messages, he had left his phone at our house that evening. She saw texts from my wife. They weren't ordinary messages. They were intimate, insistent, and they asked him to meet. My daughter's world tilted. She came to me with the phone in her hand, eyes burning. I felt my own world tilt right alongside hers. Confrontation is never as cinematic as people imagine. There were no raised voices at first, only questions that needed answers. I asked Ahmed what had happened. He broke down and admitted that he had been manipulated, pulled into late-night conversations and secret meetings with Samina. He said she had promised him things, told him lies about our family, and pressured him at a time when he was vulnerable. He sounded ashamed, confused, and lost. I tried to speak to Samina calmly, to give her room to explain, but calm dissolved into accusation when she laughed it off and told me to mind my own business. That laugh was worse than anger. It was a revelation of indifference. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She simply shrugged and said the situation had complicated itself. I realized then that this was not a lapse in judgment. It was a choice she had made repeatedly. Revenge is a tempting word, but the thing about revenge is it comes in different shapes. I could have exposed them at the wedding, humiliated them both in front of family, and watched as their lives splintered. Instead, I wanted something that would matter longer than a scene, something that would stop her from destroying more lives. I started collecting evidence, quietly and without theater. Messages, timestamps, bank transfers that didn't make sense, and witnesses who had seen them together. What I found was worse than betrayal. There were payments made from Samina's account to Ahmed's under strange descriptions. There were emails where she had forged messages to make it look like Ahmed had been estranged from my daughter's family, and there were threats she had made to coerce him into silence. It was a pattern, manipulation tied to financial coercion. This was not just adultery. It was a deliberate scheme. I took the documents to a lawyer, not for vengeance alone, but to make sure the process would stand up to scrutiny. Legal counsel told me what I already suspected. If we could prove coercion, fraud, or forgery, there would be grounds for criminal investigation. The lawyer's voice was clinical and calm, and that steadiness steadied me. I filed a complaint, laying out the evidence, the timeline, and the witnesses who would testify. The police investigation moved with a steadiness I hadn't expected. They interviewed Ahmed, my daughter, neighbors, and several people who had been privy to late-night meetings. When they searched Samina's devices and bank records, the pattern we had suspected emerged like a map revealing hidden roads. The forgeries and the transfers were there. The coercive messages were time-stamped and consistent. It was damning without melodrama. When the officers came to take Samina in, the house felt hollow. She walked past us with a face that was neither defiant nor broken, more like someone relieved to be free of pretense. My daughter turned away. I held her hand and felt the tremor in her fingers. Seeing Samina led away, knowing she would face charges, did not bring the triumphant satisfaction I imagined. It brought a quiet, complicated sense of closure, and a heavy emptiness. The trial was a blur of testimony, paper evidence, and the steady hum of legal procedure. Friends and relatives debated in whispers, some calling my actions cruel, others saying it was justice. Ahmed testified about his vulnerability and how Samina had taken advantage of it. My daughter spoke with a dignity that made me proud despite the pain. The judge listened, read, and finally delivered a sentence that included conviction for fraud and coercion. Samina was ordered to serve time and to make restitution. People asked me afterward if I felt vindicated. The truth is complicated. There was a part of me that felt justice had been served. A line had been drawn that said manipulation and deception would not be tolerated. But there was also a recurring ache, a sense that in bringing her down I had also torn the family apart in ways that might not fully mend. The wedding did not happen as planned. My daughter chose to put distance between herself and both the pain and the memories. Months after, when the initial shock dimmed, I tried to rebuild what remained. There were long conversations with my daughter about trust, boundaries, and the shape of forgiveness. She was angry but thoughtful, and she decided to take time before making any big decisions about her future. I supported her without imposing my will. This, too, felt like a form of repair. As for me, I learned that revenge can be a tool when wielded with a clear purpose, but it is not a salve for grief. I had wanted to protect my daughter and to stop further harm, and in that goal I succeeded. But I also had to reckon with the ruins that justice leaves behind: a wife in jail, a daughter whose plans were upended, and a family that would need patience and honesty to knit itself back together. In the quiet evenings, I sit and reflect on how fragile trust is, how it takes years to build and minutes to fracture. I talk with my daughter about what forgiveness might look like for her, and I remind myself that consequence and compassion can coexist. There is no neat moral in our story, only the ongoing work of choosing how to live after betrayal. If there is any lesson I would pass on, it is this: when someone you love betrays you, acting with clarity and principle matters more than acting from rage. I chose a path that sought to stop harm and to hold someone accountable rather than to humiliate them for spectacle. That choice did not erase the hurt, but it gave us a foundation to begin again, slowly, carefully, and with our eyes open.